the interesting things that were happening, and that's where your example of this in a minute?
Yeah, actually, sometime back here, I think it was in the end of August, I was getting into the interpretation for the report that we just issued on the 15th, and in the process, I had to go through all the immediacy data. Now, we break all of our data down into 3 groups: immediacy, short-term, and longer-term. And the immediacy data is effective usually from about 3 days from the point we capture it to about 3 weeks. Not much longer than that usually. Maybe the end of the 3rd week. And the shorter-term data is from the 3rd week through about the end of the 3rd or 4th month, and the longer-term data is from the 4th month onward. And the immediacy data is usually the largest, because the theory upon which we work is that, well, basically everybody's psychic, and they leak out all these little bits of psychic stuff. And, of course, the lower grade of a psychic you are, the shorter range your vision is likely to be. Just sort of stands to reason. And that's, again, a premise that we're operating on, that those people that don't really know they're psychic or just sort of wandering around driving and stuff and bump into their psychicness, they're not going to really bump into any long-range sort of predictions. They're going to get mainly the short-term stuff. So we always have a lot of volume of that. In that group, I came up with a bunch of temporal markers that are on a particular path. And one was that, well, we were going to have a fairly large earthquake of some damage, a lot of words about buildings falling into their foundations. And this would occur around between the 2nd and the 4th of September. And then we were going to have some minor terrorism incidents that appeared to span from the 7th through the 9th. And then we were going to have a surprise hurricane, I said, that would affect the East Coast, and that would happen around the 13th to the 15th, maybe out to the 17th, but it just seemed to center around the 15th. Well, we did have the earthquake. It was the Indonesian one. There were a fair number of houses that did indeed, when the pictures came out some weeks later, show up, collapsed into their foundation. And then we did have the minor terrorism events. On the 7th of September, we had a bomb explode outside the stock exchange in Athens. We had terrorism events in India that were quashed or thwarted on the 8th. And then on the 9th, there was something I can't remember at the moment. So we had it was spread out over those 3 days. And then I thought, oh, well, it looks like we missed it on the 15th, because the 15th came and went, no surprise hurricane. But it turns out that there was a low pressure that moved over on the 14th and started raining over the southeast of the U.S. And it's been raining since the 14th, and we now have huge amounts of flooding in South Carolina, Georgia, that region, in the southeast. Then the flooding, when you go and you happen to catch it on the cable news and so forth, and here it comes to our example about language. If you go and look at CNN or any of these headline news or stuff, you'll see that they keep saying words that bring up hurricane. And they'll make a statement like, we haven't seen flooding like this since Hurricane Frank or whoever. And then they'll say, boy, the amount of flooding here at this level hasn't been seen since Hurricane Ira, and so on and so on. So we actually got the language correct. There was a, quote, surprise hurricane. It just didn't have any winds with it. But we're having all the other effects that were described within that immediacy data, including the fact that they have to rescue people, and there's a minor level of evacuations going on, and there is some damage, and that there will continue to be damage, and it'll continue around for a couple of weeks as the effects of this are all told. So the language is actually showing up, even though the linguistics at the time led me to think it would actually be a hurricane, not many references to a hurricane without winds, if that makes sense.
It does. Well, we had a surprise tornado here.
Yes, but that doesn't count.
Yeah, 2 of them, I think.
Yeah, it's a slightly different critter there, yeah. But the interesting part of all of that is that the immediacy data, where we actually have the most spectacular level of striking examples of being accurate, is within the immediacy data. And you would think that, oh, well, we'd just drop all this shorter-term stuff and crank out reports once a month or something using just the immediacy data. The problem is, with the immediacy data, that we always feel that we're chasing time, because there's so much of it. It might take us 2 months to digest, and by that time, half of all of those predictions have already happened. Or half of the forecasts that we could have made have already occurred and the events are out, just because there's so much of it and it's tedious to go through. In fact, these newer reports we're actually using mostly short-term and long-term data to try and get ahead of it without this continuous chasing time feel. I mean, you think about deadlines. Here we've got deadlines within the language itself, not necessarily artificially imposed, but you certainly feel that way. And so it's driving us crazy. It's much more relaxed now to do it this way, but we do miss that level of striking examples of being correct. Like the Northeast Power outage of a number of years back was one of our better forecasts, and it came out 3 weeks before the event, was just surprisingly accurate in the linguistics. And that was because it came from the immediacy data, where we have that rich layer of detail involved. But that's kind of, it's a difficult process, no matter what. So really the path we're on at the moment makes a lot more sense because we need that longer-term heads-up in order to do anything.
That makes absolute sense, but it's just, apart from from the knowledge and the information that you put out, it's each time that you talk, it reveals to me, it makes clearer to me, not how you're doing it, but what you're doing, mm-hmm. and it is absolutely fabulous.
Fascinating.
Well, it's a ton of work.
I am sure of that.
Yeah, when we got into the immediacy data there, and especially now that, and there's another aspect of this that's curious. Over the past, 7 years or so, the level of immediacy data relative to the other data types has significantly grown, even though a number of our sources for data have been cut off by, for instance, we can't access China anymore. It used to be we were getting all kinds of stuff out of China, but the Chinese government's getting really tight on clamping stuff down. So even though we've lost some sources, we still find immediacy data is going way up. Now, if one had a large enough history, then one might be able to say, maybe people are becoming more psychic and something is actually occurring relative to our environment. And that's why we're seeing this growth of immediacy data. Curious thought, eh?
Mm.
Yes, that's a very lovely thought. Maybe people are paying more attention to themselves.
I was thinking the other way, though. I was thinking that even if they weren't paying attention, maybe this new area of space, the extra energies that are coming in, are actually impacting humans, and that's why we're seeing more and more leaks of immediacy data, and thus the growth of it. Just as real curious, we're in 97 or 98, I established a baseline for a particular run I was doing, and it was relative to the amount of UFO information that was out on the net. And so I got this baseline, and that baseline between late 98, so probably October of 98, and the first part of 2000, maybe June or so of 2000, there was a 10,000% increase.
Gee.
And then from 2000 to 2003, there was a tenfold increase off of that. And then we've seen a continued rate of growth since then, relative to language associated, and it eventually fell all into our entity where we have the unknown and officially denied and denied the science and all of this kind of stuff all stored together because we had to have some bucket for it all. And that's our Space Goat Farts entity. And it has grown substantially. It used to be relatively small, and now, and it was not an artifact of our processing.
Well, let's let people go, new listeners, halfpasthuman.com, and that's where you can order the reports that we've been talking about. And here we are with Clif, Beyond the Ordinary. We'll be back.
Beyond the Ordinary, Clif is with us today, halfpasthuman.com. So what's next, Clif?
Well, there's this issue of the meme that we've seen out there, the 15% business. People that have read the most recent report, I go to, there's a few paragraphs, 3 or 4 paragraphs discussing this idea of 15%. And we saw it out there sometime back. We didn't know what the detail was going to be, but we knew that there was going to be a new wedge. The thin edge of a wedge was going to make its appearance, and this wedge was going to be a propagandistic tool for the powers that be, which will surface probably about July of next year, and then take a whole 3 or 4 months of real intense force behind it before it fades. But basically the idea is this. You're going to encounter the idea that someone is out there presumably with the cast of authority behind them, suggesting that some 15% of the populace of Earth, of humans, has alien DNA in them. and this is apparently spread across all what we think of as all races of humans. I think there's only one human race, and there's just subdivisions within that. So I get into trouble talking about this kind of thing. So, but across all of the subdivisions of humans, Caucasoid, Negroid, Mongoloid, et cetera, there's some 15% of each of these people, presumably,